This was around March in 1987. My sister and I were chatting at the doorsteps. My sister was tickling me from behind. I meant to hit her with my elbow, but I hit on the edge of the wooden platform of the door. What I experienced was that I was a tiny object of myself traveling with very high speed in dark space with a light where I could see the hollow dark space that I was traveling in. I heard the vibration sound of the air when I traveled in the hollow space. I was in this state for about 10 to 15 minutes. But after the 15 minutes, I heard my mother and sister trying to wake me up by spraying water on my face. What they told me was, my body was falling down from the sitting position on the steps. Initially, my sister thought I was pretending, as if I were falling down with pain. Whatever my sister and my mother were trying to do and talk to me, I could not hear anything. But after that event, I never paid attention to what has happened to me until yesterday. I was with a group of about 15 people discussing the Upanishad. One of the main persons, who was giving a lecture on the Upanishad, said we are only a material with some physical form. In order to reach God, we should see ourselves as out of the physical form. As I was hearing this talk, I remembered my experience. I thought I will share my experience with my husband. So I went home and discussed it with him. I never told him during my 11 years of marriage with him, because I was so busy with my studies, my children and my job. I never thought of paying attention to the death experience that I had almost about 17 years back. My husband and me discussed it for an hour, and I was telling him that some of the gurus have a soul that departs from their body. So what I was thinking at the time when these books were written, there was no scientific knowledge of the human body. From the recent studies of what is needed to build a human body, proteins and all other minerals, etc., are required. They found it very hard to build proteins. Even using thousands of computers, they found it is impossible to generate those proteins. So with this little bit of scientific knowledge that I gained, I am analyzing my death experience as being that we have some type of particles, that is what is called soul, that operate our brain functionality, which is traveling in our body. Once we reach the death state, those particles, soul, are the ones which come out of our body and start traveling again in the space, until it again comes into some body form. So I think there is life after death.
I was in the hospital to deliver my first child. In the labor room, the nurse examined me. She told me that my blood pressure was too high and that I needed to take the medication for my blood pressure. The hospital didn't have the medication. My husband went out from the hospital to buy it. While my husband was gone the whole night, I was having an intense labor pain. There wasn't anyone but me in the labor room, no one to comfort me in my pain. Morning came, and I was so exhausted and still in so much pain. Finally, the doctor came and checked me. It was obvious in her face that something was not right. She immediately called the nurses and told me that I need to push so I can deliver my baby. But no matter how hard I pushed, my baby wasn't coming out. The labor process continued for at least 30 more minutes. There was more concern on the face of my doctor. She told me that I needed to do one more last push, and if the baby won't come out, I would be delivering my baby by cesarean section. Well, my bouncing baby boy was delivered. After my baby's delivery, I was feeling nauseated and my head was like ready to explode. I was feeling so numb and very weak. They moved me to the recovery room. My blood pressure was checked again, and I was told that I needed to take my blood pressure medication, because the blood pressure was not going down. My husband was not back yet with my medication. The nurse left and my vision was turning yellow, then grey, all of the sudden it was black. Then the strangest thing was happening. I felt my body so still. I felt part of me lifting out, and I was feeling myself starting to move. I was standing and it was velvet black. I started to make a step, then there was this light from up above. I was watching the light. It was dim and it was getting a little bit brighter, and was so beautiful, relaxing, the most comfortable time of my life was happening. I was feeling the presence of the most powerful being. I felt happiness and contentment. I started walking to the light and suddenly, I realized that I just had a baby. I have not seen my baby. I needed to see my baby. My baby needed me. I needed to go back. It was like all the things that were in my mind was my conversation to God. I woke up coughing, gasping and so thirsty. My sister was on my hospital bed, crying, and told me I was dead. She called for the nurse. Then there was my husband, he finally brought my medication. I told them what happened after a week. There was a time that I shared my story to some of my friends, but it seems like I sounded crazy to them. I never talk to anyone about this anymore. Sometimes it is wonderful to possess special abilities, and sometimes it is very scary. At the time of the experience, I was working in a highly stressful job, and had just returned from overseas after many months of hectic traveling and taxing negotiations with no relief. The next night, on September 15th, I was putting my young children to sleep on my bed when I fell asleep myself. A few minutes later, my husband came in and began to take the little ones to their room. As he moved the first one, the flesh on the left side of my body began to scream. It felt as if it was twisting upon itself. Almost immediately, I popped out of my body. This was not the first time that I have had an NDE. I've had one more that I remember. Also, I've always had spiritual experiences, including a past life memory, which an aunt reminded me of. I popped out through the top of my head, through the wall of the house. The bed was set against the wall, stood up and spoke to a white cloud-like, human-shaped figure outlined in blue. I've now come to understand that that was one of my guardian angels. I asked him to help me, because my body was dying. There was no uncertainty about his desire or ability to help. He replied, "For so long he has been telling you to come out. Now, look at what is happening to you." Immediately, I knew him and he knew me and that it was good and in order that it was so, too. I knew he was referring to the job that God had instructed me to leave in January 1997. But I had been trying to get away with keeping the job. 3. I got a bit irritated, because I felt that at this crisis point it was unfair to scold me. I said, okay, I'll come out. I'll leave. Just help me with my body. He told me to go back in and try to call my husband. I did this, but the left side of my mouth was failing, and I had no control over it, and could not form the words. I jumped back out, and said the mouth is not working. I could see through the wall of the house into our bedroom where my husband continued to carry the children over, and he then told me to go back in and try the brain. I went in and tried to call my husband with my brain, but it sounded like an old record being played on a wrong, slower speed. Again, I popped out thinking, oh boy, this is it, adios amigos. I told him that the brain was no longer working and then he said, okay, go back in. I'll take over. I re-entered my body and strangely, I was able to do localized thinking, not remote, like trying to call someone. I asked God not to let me die, but that if I must, to let me last until morning, so that the children would not have the trauma of their mom dying during the night without telling them goodbye. I said, Father, not my will but yours be done. Into your hands I commend my spirit. And then knew nothing until my husband came to bed. The whole thing lasted about 20 minutes. When my husband came to bed, I apparently revived and told him that I was not feeling well. He confirmed the statement the following morning, and seemed to go unconscious. The next thing I knew was that I awoke. It was morning and I was checking to see if I was really still here. I went outside to investigate the world, feeling a little tired as if I had just been jogging. Outside the hills, trees and flowers looked extra bright, and I was glad to be back. I contacted my sister, a medical doctor, and told her what had happened. She took me through a series of tests, but finding the responses too slow on my left side immediately sent me for a CAT scan, computerized axial tomography scan. The results showed a spot consistent with calcification, hardening of the brain. Subsequent tests, ECG, electrocardiogram, EKG, electrocardiogram, and MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, gave me the all clear. Email to Jody Long in response to the question, "Can you describe more fully about how you know you died?" Hi Jody. There was in fact no one present who could clinically certify that I was dead. Indeed, it was in that sense a private affair. My husband did not even appreciate the extent of it, and I had slept. When I awoke it felt more like being unconscious, for the entire night, with my head on his shoulder. The incident took place at night at home, and by the morning, I had seemed to have recovered except for the after effects I described in my account. I must say though, that from that experience it is clear that humans are aware that they are dying at the moment that they are dying. The feelings of the moment cannot be confused with any other sensation, such as fainting or going to sleep, for example. The dying sensations seem to be unique and definitely identifiable. Several months after the experience, I was listening to a TV documentary on which they were describing the symptoms of an impending stroke. Every single symptom described, including the sort of lift-off and float that one can experience while walking, was a symptom that I had been experiencing prior to the NDE. I had in fact been in a job which, while I had been enjoying it, I had also started reacting quite stressfully to some elements of the responsibilities.